All right, so budget. You're asking about the budget and everything like that. I need to have probably more of an in-depth conversation in regards to my account to get a bit better understanding of this. I've already had a bit of an idea and a strategy because my strategy works on the theory of, you know, not that negative gearing was bad, but the context of, your average taxpayer out there is going to be paying 37 cents in the dollar. Okay. I'm not talking the guys that are on 250, 300,000 a year. I'm talking the guys that, mum and dad, dad's earning hypothetically 130,000 a year. Mum's working, say, 4 days a week as a nurse in the hospital, and she's earning around about that sort of, say, $80,000 a year. You guys have got a couple of kids, and I'm just gonna bring up a little website that I use to show in regards. Once again, this is not tax advice. I'm not an accountant, but this sort of shows, in a sense, a few of those numbers, right? So annual salary, 130,000, right? Down here, we tick the box to say they got private health, married, $80,000 a year, ticked in the box, right? And then we come down here and we add in there, say, an annual deduction, okay? So let's just say that you're running at a $10,000 loss on your property, okay? Now, that could be split out between you and your wife, and that split might be 5,000. So the website I can see is potentially not updated yet because it's still showing that, but you're looking at $1,600 back as a return. So you're spending $5,000 to get $1,600 back. And to me, that's not a great way of spending your money. And you can see there that you're in that sort of 30% tax bracket. You haven't quite hit the 37 cents in the dollar. Now, if we tweak that number a little bit and said that you're on $150,000 a year, once again, you're spending that $5,000 and you're making $1,950 back of it. So you're losing $3,050. So what my strategy was from the early days in regards to all of this was to look at a way of minimizing that. And that's through a granny flat strategy. So here's an example of a property that I've just recently purchased for a client. And I can give you a lot of numbers because the client has very generously given me a lot of numbers around this property. So this is the property here. Okay, you can see that's currently off market. You can see what they're estimating in regards to that. So it was a 1970s build. It's a 920 square meter block, 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 3 car space. Now, if I click into it, decent, not anything overly wow or amazing, but we were able to pick this up for $822,500. Okay. So we were able to get a bit of a deal on it. Conventional Caboolture, 3-bedder. Bathroom needed a little bit of work and a little bit of silicone fixed up, but it's doable. It doesn't need a renovation. It'll last the next 5, maybe 7 years before he needs to rip it out and redo it. And at that point in time, you can choose to either do that or sell it, whatever that looks like. And you can see from that photo, there's a granny flat now in the backyard. When this property was originally done, and I'm actually really glad that that's there because you can see it, there was no granny flat in the property. You can also see the back fence that's now come up in the property, so I'm really happy. And you can see where they've divided it down there too, off that side. And you can see the front of the house. So that there's a car park underneath, car park underneath, car park underneath, and then a double car on the side. That there was actually designed for a caravan down the side of the house, and it's big enough to tandem park for the granny flat out the back. You can see the overall size of the block of land. So what he's done is he's put a fence that runs down here, so giving access still to the main house with a gate, to the air conditioning unit, the hot water system, and the electrical box. And these guys can have access down to the back. They can park their cars underneath, and the granny flat now runs across the back of the yard here. The main house is renting for $680 per week, and the granny flat is renting for $495 per week. So you're looking at $1,175 per week in rental return on this property, which is absolutely phenomenal. The other thing too is he's put the granny flat in and he's had a bank valuation done on the property, and that bank valuation has come in at $1,050,000. Now, this property technically settled the first week of January this year, and that bank val was done in the middle of April. So he's had, from the outlay of putting the granny flat in, which was about $150,000, the purchasing cost of the property, his all-in cost was, including my fee, was $977,500 or $600 roughly. He's seen a $62,500 uplift, and his rent gross per year is $61,600 per annum. Now, if I flip over to a interest-only loan calculator that you can do on, some websites and stuff like that, I'll show you what a repayment of around about $1 million loan interest-only looks like. So on an interest-only repayment, you're looking at, on $1 million worth of debt, at around about a 6.29% interest rate. Now that's going to vary, interest only, etc., etc., etc. It's not something ideal that I'd recommend. I'd always recommend, from a mortgage brokering perspective, a principal and interest repayment, because it's in a sense forced saving. You're increasing your equity in regards to that property. But if we have a look there, and I change this back to a weekly repayment, you're looking at $1,209 per week. He's receiving $1,175 per week. So that out-of-pocket expense on the back of the granny flat is minimal. Now, if we were to change this to a $800,000 loan, and to say that he was to chip in that 200 grand himself, you would see that that drops way down to $967 per week. That there, and if he was to take it out over a 5-year loan term, the rent is going to increase over time. With what the government's done in changes, I was speaking to a Ray White agent that I know quite well, and he was saying that the senior level management at Ray White there was sort of telling them in a bit of a chat that they're anticipating a 10 to 15% increase to rents over the next 12 months. With looking at numbers like this, I personally think that increase is going to be probably more like 20 to 25%. And the reason why I say that is because if you were to remove out the extra income from the granny flat, you're short $1,200 a week for that property and $1 million. If that property was going to rent for, say, $800 a week, that's a $400 gap that you're going to have to make up. Under the old rules with the negative gearing, you were able to get, say, 30% of that back. So it hurt, but it wasn't terrible. Now you get none of that back. So looking for other options in the way of, receiving that extra rent by having the granny flat in the backyard is, I think, going to be that strategy moving forward. And it's going to make a huge difference between the investors that will grow and thrive out of this and the investors that are going to get left behind. So the strategy for me is still looking at existing real estate, but looking for those opportunities where we can value add. And if you were to do a small little strategic reno on that main house of, say, 15 or 20 grand, and you're able to get an extra 20 or 30 or 40 bucks a week on top of adding the granny flat in the backyard, you're going to get closer and closer to that neutrally geared from day one. And if that deposit can be a little bit more, that gives you that bit more of a headway to get ahead in life and watch that capital appreciation. And I think the strategy, because they've changed the capital gains rules as well, is going to be a cash flow piece. You know, if you can buy an asset that is bringing in, say, $1,000 a week now, and you can have, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 of them and pay them off over time, when you hit retirement, you're going to be looking at, in today's money, now what that from an inflationary point of view looks like in the future, I don't know. But on today's money, if you had, say, 4 paid off houses, each generating around about $1,000 a week, you'd be looking at $4,000 a week in retirement. Now, yes, you are going to lose some of that money to rates, which is that fixed cost. You are potentially going to lose some of that money to land tax. You are going to lose money to insurance. You are going to lose money to paying the tax man for that income that you're earning. But if you were to work on the theory that 1,500 of that was to go into insurance, water, rates, land tax, and then income tax, that still leaves you with $2,500 a week. If you were to sit on that now and go, I had no mortgage, I'm retired, I have $2,500 a week coming in from my property portfolio, what would that look like for your lifestyle, and how would that look like? That's the sort of strategy and the strategic planning that I'm talking to with my buyers and my clients. And I've got one client who I've managed to be able to buy 3 rental properties for him in the last 15 months. He's seen around about $600,000 uplift in capital appreciation, and he's receiving around about $3,250 gross per week in rent. Now, if we look at another 3 properties for him over the next 2 or 3 years, he's going to be looking at something around about that 6.5 mark, and then all he's got to do is pay it down, and him and his wife are going to be set. With what's changed in regards to negative gearing and capital gains, for me, it's coming down to a yield play or a cash flow play. In a sense, what can that property cash flow to you? And the properties that you're looking at purchasing moving forward, and the properties that we need to chase and look for from a point is, how do we get this property to, how do we buy it either A, positively or neutrally geared, or what is the quickest possible way with the minimal amount of outlay of getting these properties to that neutrally geared or positively geared status? And the granny flat strategy for me is that way of getting this property to neutrally geared or positively geared sooner rather than later, which means that that cost of holding that asset is minimal to potentially putting money into your pocket each week rather than costing you money each week. So the government's changed things a little bit, which is going to effectively make it easier over time for investors that get that right advice, can employ that right strategy, are going to make more money quicker and are going to be able to grow quicker because they have that extra income, and it's working with someone that understands how you can modify that situation and having a strategic plan in place to get that extra cash flow coming through. And the great thing about the granny flat that I put forward and recommend is it's modular, so they crane it in and crane it out. It's on stumps. So if you do go to sell that asset down the track and the real estate agent comes out and has a look at it and says, look, if you could restore it back to a family home with a massive backyard, it would sell for an extra 100 grand, where if you leave it with the granny flat, it's going to sell for 100 grand less. It's really not that expensive to crane that out and restore the backyard to normal to be able to get that extra money. So you've got those property guys out there that are talking about negative gearing, and we've got new options in relation to how we can buy in these amazing housing estates, master plan communities. You know, Stockland's building 50,000 homes in this new location on the Sunshine Coast. It's going to, you know, have its own CBD, its own centre. You're going to be able to get the negative gearing advantages. You're going to be on a nice low maintenance block, which is only 300 square metres. I sit there and I look at that and I go, well, you're only getting 300 square metres. Is it better to buy a townhouse right next to the beach or be on a 300 square metre block in the back of Whoop Whoop, which is kind of where Aura, that development that I'm sort of talking about, is. Now, I know I have mentioned Aura in the past, but one thing I didn't mention was there's this is Aura here. This is the development here. And if I go to the master plan, which hopefully loads in a couple of ticks, and you can see that, you can see this area here. So that's Aura there, and that's the massive development. So this is that new city centre I'm talking about, and these are all the different sort of areas, and this is that area down here that they've started to sell off. Well, just across here, there's an area called Aura South. Okay, now Aura South, I'm just going to jump back for 2 ticks because I'm going to see if I can bring it up. Halls Creek, Aura South, okay. Introducing Aura South. So they're already starting to talk about and everything like that. So that there is Aura, what they're building right now, and there is Aura South. So Maroochydore, like there's Mooloolaba. Maroochydore is up here. It's not even on the map. That there's Caloundra, right? That's that rail line that I was talking about previously that ends up here. This is where the University Hospital is. So you can see you're really, really far south when it comes to that overall area. Now, if I scroll down, it's been cleared for over 50 years. So they're promoting that, which is great. Stockland's purchased 1,231 hectares of land in 2004. And more than 85% of the land was cleared over 50 years ago. So they're promoting that this is a great area. So if you go 40% of that is going to be set aside for wildlife and parks and stuff like that, that's around about 400 hectares. That still leaves 800 hectares of land. If you then go and go, rightio, that 800 hectares, 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters. If you go for roadways, footpath, and all those bits and pieces, that's going to wipe out, say, 2,000 square meters of land. That leaves you with 8,000 square meters. If you then say the average block size is, let's just go with, say, 400 square meters, that's 20. So 20 times 800, that is 16,000 homes. Now, if they come along and they go, well, what we're going to do is, you know, Tim, you're a little bit wrong with your numbers. You haven't included any shops or schools and all those bits and pieces. It's like, okay, cool. Let's drop that back down to, say, 600 hectares of land, okay? And let's call it 4,000 square meters is wiped out by that. And let's say the average size is 300 square meters for the house, okay? They go a little bit smaller. So you're still getting 20 homes per hectare, times that by 600, that's still 12,000 houses. That is a tremendous amount of supply. And, you know, if Aura has been running on and been going, and it's probably still going to continue for the next probably 10 to 15 years, and it's been traveling for 10 to 15 years, and I think Aura is somewhere in around the vicinity of about 10,000 to 12,000 homes, you're looking at 30 to 40 years worth of land supply. Where's the scarcity in that? Why would I pay extra for your 20-year-old home that's on a 300 square meter block where I can go get a brand new home down the road? You know, as an investor, the negative gearing rules are still in play. I'm buying the new house because I want the negative gearing. You know, I can't manufacture any extra income because it's only a 300 square meter block. How are you going to fit a granny flat on that? So I'm stuck with a house with house rent, where if you go and look at these older areas where there's 600, 800, 900 square meters, you can look at putting those granny flats in the back of the property, and you can look at manufacturing that extra cash flow out of them. So you've just got to sit there and ask yourself the question of, am I prepared to sell this property in the future? And if so, who's my potential buyer for it? Who is likely to buy this home? Can I drive into this location and it gives me a sense of wow, that when I'm 50 or 60 or 70 years old, that I'll sit there and go, I want to move there. That's where I want to live. Or when I'm 50 and 60 and 70 years old, would I much prefer to be in that, 3-story walk-up unit right next to the water for similar money to what that house is potentially going to be worth? And if that's the case, am I better off buying that unit now for that lifestyle into the future and just copping it on the chin? These are the questions that investors and the smart investors are going to start asking themselves. Is negative gearing on brand new stock the best strategy for me? Or is there a better option where I can be neutrally geared or positively geared and making money sooner from day one? They're the two questions you're going to have to ask yourself. You're going to have a tremendously tough time. If you think about it right, and you were negatively geared hypothetically $400 a week, and as I did with the pay calculator before, you get say a 30% return on that, you're looking at $120 a week. So you're out of pocket $280 a week, and you're getting $120 back from the government in that, which made it a little bit more bearable. Well, now you're going to have to carry that full $400 loss. Is that something you're going to be able to sustain and carry on moving into the future? You've got to find those options of putting in that granny flat to allow you to manufacture that extra income out of the property and get ahead in regards. And by putting in that extra granny flat, if that drops your out-of-pocket expense from say $400 a week to, I don't know, $150 a week, it's a little bit more manageable and it's not so bad. Even if you have a look at, okay, I was looking at buying a house, it was going to be $400 a week negatively geared, and I was going to get $120 back because that's where my tax bracket is, etc. And I discussed it with my accountant, and that's what they advised me that I can get back, which, you need to be having those conversations with that qualified investment savvy accountant who understands that. And he's sitting there going, you're only going to get $30 a week back on this. And it's like, okay, I can carry that 120. Why wouldn't you just carry the 150? It's a lot less. You're less out of pocket and you're closer to being neutrally geared sooner. And you can carry that loss forward from what I understand within there. Now, how long you can carry that loss, I don't know. That is a conversation to have with the accountant, and I will be having that accountant. So if I get the asked question, I can say, well, my accountant has said this, but you need to have the conversation with your accountant to make sure that they're interpreting the law the same way. Because the last thing you want is the ATO breathing down your neck and you going through, an audit because you've done the wrong thing.